Kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing shattered pottery with gold. And somehow, a concept from a 15th century craft workshop turned out to be the most accurate description of what modern psychology has spent 30 years trying to prove about human beings. Most of us have heard of post traumatic stress disorder. PTSD gets talked about a lot, and rightfully so. It's real, it's serious, and it deserves all the awareness it gets. But what happens far less often in mainstream conversation is the acknowledgement that trauma doesn't always leave people broken. Sometimes, and this is the part that surprises people, trauma leaves people fundamentally stronger, more alive, more connected, and more purposeful than they were before the event that shattered them. And this isn't just anecdotal. This isn't just a handful of inspiring stories. This is something psychologists have been studying systematically for decades. The term post traumatic growth was actually coined by two researchers named Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun back in the 1990s. They were clinical psychologists who noticed something strange in their patients who had experienced major life crises. Some of these people weren't just recovering, they were reporting changes in themselves that went beyond returning to baseline. They were describing a kind of transformation that wouldn't have happened without the trauma. Tedeschi and Calhoun spent years developing a framework to understand and measure this phenomenon, and what they found was profound. Here's the thing though, post traumatic growth is widely misunderstood, even by people who have experienced it. And I want to be really precise here because getting this wrong actually matters. Growth after trauma is not the same as resilience. Resilience is essentially bouncing back to who you were before. You weather the storm and you come out the other side as the same person. Growth is different. Growth means you come out the other side as someone new, someone who wouldn't have existed without the breaking. The metaphor that researchers themselves often use is the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks don't disappear. They become part of what makes the object more beautiful and more valuable. Now let's talk about what post-traumatic growth actually looks like in practice, because this is where it gets really interesting. Tedeschi and Calhoun identified 5 core areas where people tend to experience growth after major trauma. The first is a greater appreciation for life. People who have been through serious illness, loss, or life threatening events often report that everyday moments feel more vivid and meaningful afterward. They're not performing gratitude, they genuinely feel it in a way they didn't before. The second area is relationships with others. Survivors frequently describe a deepening of their close relationships and sometimes a pruning away of connections that felt shallow. When you've been through something catastrophic, you tend to become much clearer about who actually matters to you and why. The third area is new possibilities. Many people emerge from trauma with a completely different sense of what they want their life to look like: career changes, creative pursuits, advocacy work. Trauma has a way of burning away what you thought you wanted and revealing what you actually care about. The fourth area is personal strength. Not strength in the muscular tough guy sense, but a quiet and deep knowing that you can survive difficulty. People who have made it through terrible things carry a particular kind of confidence that can't be manufactured any other way. And the fifth area is what researchers call spiritual or existential change. This doesn't necessarily mean religious faith, although it can. It means a deepened engagement with questions of meaning, purpose, and what life is actually about. Trauma forces an existential reckoning that many people never have to face until much later in life, if at all. But here is the question that I think matters most. How does this actually happen? What is the psychological mechanism that turns devastation into development? Because it doesn't happen automatically. Not everyone who experiences trauma grows from it. And understanding why some people do and some people don't is where the science gets truly fascinating. The key concept is what researchers call cognitive processing. When something traumatic happens, it essentially smashes into your existing understanding of the world and leaves it in pieces. Psychologists call this your assumptive world. All the beliefs you held about safety, about fairness, about your own identity, about how life was supposed to go. Trauma doesn't just hurt you emotionally, it destroys your mental model of reality. And in that destruction, there is actually an opportunity. When you're forced to rebuild your understanding of the world from the ground up, you can build something more complex, more nuanced, and ultimately more true than what you had before. This is why people who have experienced loss often say things like, I see what really matters now. They're not just being poetic. Their worldview has literally been reconstructed with better materials. The process of making sense of what happened, of telling the story of it and integrating it into your identity is central to whether growth occurs. This is also why social support matters so much in the aftermath of trauma. Not because having people around makes the pain hurt less, though it might, but because other people help us process and narrate what happened to us. We need witnesses to our stories. We need people who can sit with us in the wreckage and help us find the words for what we're experiencing. Research consistently shows that people with strong social networks are more likely to experience post traumatic growth, not because they suffered less, but because they had more help rebuilding. There's also a crucial distinction that I need to make here, because this is where a lot of well meaning discussions about trauma get muddled. Post traumatic growth and post traumatic stress are not opposites, they can coexist. In fact, some research suggests that people who experience the highest levels of growth also experience significant distress initially. The suffering isn't something you bypass on the way to growth. The suffering is part of what makes the growth possible. You cannot get the gold in the cracks without the breaking first. This has massive implications for how we think about supporting people through difficult times. Rushing someone through their grief or their shock or their pain in order to get to the silver lining is actually counterproductive. The deep emotional processing, as uncomfortable as it is to witness in someone you love, is exactly what creates the conditions for transformation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone in crisis is simply refuse to look away from their pain with them. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough in this conversation, which is the difference between genuine post traumatic growth and what researchers have started calling illusory growth. Some people report experiencing growth after trauma as a way of coping. It's a narrative they tell themselves to make sense of what happened, but it doesn't actually translate into behavioral change or lasting shifts in their worldview. Genuine growth shows up in how you actually live, not just in what you say about what you've been through. This distinction matters because it means growth requires honesty. It requires looking at the trauma clearly, sitting with the complexity of it, and doing the hard internal work of integration rather than just crafting a redemption narrative for external consumption. Genuine post traumatic growth doesn't make the trauma okay. It doesn't mean the loss was worth it. It means something real emerged from something terrible. And those two facts can exist simultaneously without canceling each other out. So, what do you do with all of this if you're someone who has been through something hard? A few things. First, give yourself permission to be in the messy middle without forcing meaning onto it prematurely. Second, find people who can hold space for the complexity of what you're experiencing without trying to fix it or fast forward it. Third, engage with the story of what happened to you. Write about it. Talk about it with someone safe. The narrative processing is not indulgent. It is literally how growth happens neurologically and psychologically. And if you're someone supporting a person through trauma, the most important thing you can do is stay present, not with solutions or silver linings, but with genuine, sustained presence. Growth cannot be delivered from the outside, it can only be created from within, but it is far more likely when someone isn't left to do it alone. Here's what I want to leave you with. The human capacity for transformation after crisis is one of the most extraordinary things about us as a species. Post traumatic growth is not a guarantee, and it is not a requirement. You don't owe anyone your transformation, but it is real, it is documented. And if you are in the middle of something devastating right now, it is worth knowing that who you are becoming on the other side might surprise you completely. Stay blessed. God bless you always. Inner Echoes Collective.